Thank you. So just before we start the meeting tonight, I've just got a couple of notices. One of those is the Parent Body's next talk, which is on the 15th of January. That's at the museum, and it'll be on the subject of judges, politics and the public, a judge's view from inside Westminster. And it doesn't tell me who the speaker is. There we go. It's Lord Justice Green, who's a former chairman of the Law Commission. There we go. And the Natural History section's next meeting is on the 7th of February, and Geoffrey Hall will be talking on the subject of Better Late Than Never, the Leicester Fungi Study Group Millennium Year Project. So that's the meetings for the Parent Body and the Natural History section. And just before we do move on to tonight's talk, I'd just like to mention something that we did send around on the email to section members, that very sadly we've lost one of our long-standing members, Dennis Gamble, who sadly passed away just before New Year. Many of us have known Dennis for many, many years. I first met him 25 years ago when I joined the section, and he's always been one of the stalwarts of the section, always great company, and one of the members who we'll definitely miss as we go forward. So let's just take a minute to remember Dennis, and when we find out about funeral arrangements, we'll let you know. Okay, thank you. So on to tonight's meeting, and I'm very pleased to be able to welcome back Dr. Jack Matthews. Jack did his PhD at the University of Oxford, looking at Ediacaran stratigraphy, focusing on Newfoundland, but also with comparable sections here in the UK. After several postdocs in Canada and UK, focusing on geoheritage and geoconservation, he has now, for the last 3 or so years, been working on the concept of the Charnwood Forest Geopark, which we'll be telling us about here now. So if you'd like to join me and welcome Jack to the podium, and we'll hear about the Charnwood Forest Geopark. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have to press the lighting button, Tom?
Do that.
There we go. Ooh, moody. Hello, everyone here, and hello, everyone at home. Today, my plan is to tell you a little bit about an overview of the geology of Charnwood Forest. Now, being upstanding members of the geology section of the Leicester Phil, of course, you know most of the background already. So I'm not going to go and repeat the story that many of you have probably heard lots of times, but we'll do a brief overview. I'm particularly not going to spend loads of time on fossils, because in your calendar is a talk from one of your friendly societies, the Warwickshire Geology Group, where Frankie Dunn, Dr. Frankie Dunn from the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, is going to tell you all about her work on Ediacaran fossils. And if I were to tell you it, I'd just be repeating her great work. So hear it from the horse's mouth. Hear it from Frankie. She knows what she's talking about. And then I'm going to talk a little bit at the end about what is a geopark? What are we doing in Charnwood Forest? And what is the project we're working on? But in the middle, I'm going to include perhaps some of the geological stories from Charnwood Forest that historically haven't got any attention. So we'll cover some of that. But before I get onto that, I noticed you talked about your next talk from the natural history section of the Little Phil is on fungi. Did you know that the Ingoldian fungi were first described from a stream coming out of Croxton Reservoir in Charnwood Forest? There is a whole clade of fungi first described from Charnwood Forest. Basically, the whole purpose of this talk is to show you that Charnwood Forest is an amazing place, and we should all celebrate it more often. Right, hopefully, there we go. So away we go, Charnwood Forest. Now, there's a few different definitions, but when I talk about Charnwood Forest, and when our organisation talks about Charnwood Forest, this is what we mean, the 152 square kilometres that lies between Leicester, Loughborough, and the former coal mining villages and towns in the west there. It's what we call the unexpected upland. That's the promotional term that we use. Did you know, as the M1 climbs over Charnwood Forest, it is at its highest point, just next to Barden Hill. The highest point on the M1 is in Charnwood Forest. And that's how we define when we talk about Charnwood Forest. Half of it is in the borough of Charnwood, and the rest is in Hinckley and Bosworth and North West Leicestershire District Council. And within this 152 square kilometres is half of this county's nationally designated natural sites. So triple SIs, sites of special scientific interest, and national nature reserves. About half of them are in this small section, 8% of the area. And that tells you the great concentration of important nature that's to be found here. A lot of that, yes, is wildlife, but many of those designations are for geology as well. And it will come as no surprise to a group like this that those two things are related. Where you have geodiversity, you often have biodiversity, and Charnwood Forest is a great example of that. So on to our geodiversity. Here is our simplified geological map of Charnwood Forest. I am purposefully not bothering to put a key on there because the important points I will talk to you about. But the main point is, look at how many wonderful colours and therefore different rock types we have in a relatively small area that you can drive across in about 20 minutes. So we've got lots of geological stories to tell in a limited area. You can see a lot of those are the pinky browns. That's the Triassic that mantles over a lot of our geology. But then we've got Precambrian, Cambrian, Ordovician, Carboniferous, Triassic, and of course, as in most places, a sprinkling of Quaternary over the top as well. But lots of different geology to talk about in Charnwood Forest, probably a much higher density than the average even for the UK. And in even more purposeful use of a figure that can't be seen properly from a distance, you'll notice that this, you might be able to see that at the top it says a simplified diagram, because that is still simplified. That is the stratigraphy of Charnwood Forest. So we've got our pre-Cambrian rocks, our Cambrian, our Carboniferous, and our Triassic, and really that is there to show you lots of variety, lots of stories, and I'll tell you a bit more about that now. So in our brief overview, Precambrian, our oldest rocks in Charnwood Forest are somewhere around 580 million years old. We don't have a proper constraint on our oldest rocks, and they're found in the north of the geopark, just next to the lovely town of Shepshed. And actually the very oldest rocks are found at a site called Morley Quarry, which is one of the great under-recognised sites within Charnwood Forest. It's a local nature reserve, a former quarry, and you should go and visit it. You can turn up at any point and have a lovely wander round. And actually the oldest rocks there are 800 metres below you, because Morley Quarry has one of the deepest boreholes drilled in the East Midlands, or at least it was at the time that it was drilled, and 800 metres at the bottom of there is the Morley Lane volcanic lava flows. They don't naturally crop out anywhere. They're only known from that borehole, and they are our absolute oldest rocks from the geological period known as the Ediacaran. At this point in time, Charnwood Forest, as part of the paleocontinent of Avalonia, which is southern England, the Low Countries, the eastern part of Newfoundland, and the eastern part of Nova Scotia, and running down into the northern part, the northeastern part of the USA, Avalonia would have been at a latitude of about 60 degrees south of the equator. And the Paleoenvironment is something like we've got here, a volcanic island arc setting. So we've got a chain of volcanoes spewing out material with the occasional eruption, and then a fairly deep sea around them with sediments building up. So most of the Precambrian geology in Charnwood Forest is from this setting. It is a mixture of marine sediments dominated by processes like turbidity currents, these deep marine avalanches, mixes of water and sediment flowing down the slope alongside debris flows and other things, and ash and other volcaniclastic outputs mixed into that as well. That is what dominates from Ives Head in the north to Braggate Park in the south. And these are the rocks that also contain the fossils, which I'll come onto in a moment. The volcano story in Charnwood for some time has been greatly overstated, to the point where many local people think that, for example, Beacon Hill is a volcano. It's not their fault that that is what they have been told, because there is an interpretation panel at Beacon Hill that is titled Leicestershire's Volcanoes, which of course is going to lead you to believe that if you walk past quickly, that Beacon Hill is a volcano, which is why you won't find the Geopark talking about the volcano too much, because we are kind of redressing the balance. We prefer to talk about it as Charnwood Forest's hidden volcanoes, because actually we don't really know exactly where the vent was, where was or were the volcanoes. We know that that volcanic centre was somewhere near Whitwick, so in the west of the Geopark, and that's because as we get closer to Whitwick, we find increasingly proximal volcaniclastic deposits. Places like Charnwood Lodge. Charnwood Lodge is a national nature reserve, one of a handful of national nature reserves in England that is defined purely for its geology. So that is another great statement for Charnwood Forest. We have one of the only geological national nature reserves in the country. And there is, of course, the famous bomb rocks, now not thought to actually be volcanic bombs, but rather a kind of brecciated, smashed up debris flow that came out of a volcano, but something that was very nearby to a volcano, and you get other volcanic units as we get closer to Whitwick. So that's kind of telling us a little story of where Charnwood Forest, that's setting the scene some 580 to 560 million years ago in the Ediacaran, in the Precambrian, in Charnwood Forest. That's what life would have been like. But this is actually what life would have been like. This is a new reconstruction that we have had made at the Geopark. We are indebted to the incredibly talented paleoartist Martin Leicester from Czechia, who has kindly donated his time and skill for free, for which we are truly, truly grateful. And this is a reconstruction of what life would have looked like. I'm sure I don't need to tell a section which goes by the name of Charnia the full backstory of this incredible discovery that was really the gold rush of paleontology, a discovery that happened here in Charnwood Forest in the 1950s that led people to reevaluate Precambrian deposits all around the world. And from that initial discovery of Charnia in Charnwood Forest, of course, Charnia was then discovered in Australia, in China, in Canada, and in Russia, and other Precambrian fossils have been found here as well, and then around the world. And this is a new reconstruction done by Martin at Mighty Fossils. So of course we've got Charnia. People might not realise that this has all been done to scale and to the correct density of the communities of fossils that we find here in Charnwood Forest. So this one in near the middle, for those at home, you've got one Charnia in pink, middle bottom left slightly. That's the size of the holotype, about 21 centimetres tool. That's the typical one that always gets shared in photographs and in scientific textbooks all around the world. But Charnia can be huge. It can be more than a metre long, and we do find that here in Charnwood Forest as well. And then as we go around our beautiful community, we've got Charnia discus, also described in that early paper, though the description has been modified through time. We've got in the middle here the cabbage-like Bradgatea, named after Bradgate Park, first discovered and described from there by Helen Boynton and others, and also since found also in Newfoundland, in Canada, and from Australia. We have here on the right Primo candelabrum, which is also known now from the fossil deposits in Newfoundland, in Canada. On the right-hand side, the kind of bluey goblet-shaped one, this is Hyla colulis. My colleagues in Ediacaran palaeontology don't choose easy names to say at these talks. Hyla colulis, thank you, Charlotte Kensington, for your wonderful naming of that. This is a kind of goblet shape with a stem and a holdfast. You'll notice that's a common thing in the morphology of these fossils, a holdfast disc holding it to the deep marine surface, and then a stem, and then these frondose elements. And you'll notice they all have this same kind of fractal, self-similar branching structure. These are all grouped together as a group of related forms known as the rangiomorphs. Unfortunately, we didn't get naming rights after that one. They named it after a fossil that's found in Namibia. But you can't have it all, I suppose. Charnia discus, Hyla colulis, Primo candelabrum, Bradgatea, and then our most recent fossil friend, Aurora lumina attenborough, which was published in recent years, work led by Dr. Frankie Dunn. And you'll notice that that's a totally different shape. It's not a rangiomorph. It hasn't got this kind of branching structure. Instead, it has these tentacles, and she and her colleagues tell us that this is one of the oldest, or not one of the oldest, the oldest predatory animal yet found. And it was found just a few miles from where we are situated here, maybe a little further. If you're at home, maybe a little closer, depending on where you are, but here in Charnwood Forest. So really outstanding, internationally significant story of some of the oldest predatory animal fossil ever discovered yet. Maybe someone, please don't find it before we submit our dossier to UNESCO. But even if we didn't have that, we would have some of the oldest animal fossils known in the geological record. Unfortunately, our dear friends over in Newfoundland at the Mistaken Point UNESCO World Heritage Site, their rangiomorphs of Charnia and related forms are just slightly older than ours, which is a little bit disappointing, but you can't have everything. I'm not going to go into huge, as I've already said, I'm not going to go into huge detail. How do we know they're animals? All of those things, because I'm sure Frankie's going to tell you about that in her talk in a few months' time, and it'd be much nicer to hear it from her than have it repeated from what I've said. But if you did want to know more, there's more information on our website, and indeed there's a little interview we've done with Frankie about how do we know that they're animals. So if you can't go to that talk, have a look on our YouTube channel, and you can see a little 15-minute interview with Frankie. How do we know these things are indeed animals? But it's not all fossils. So while our volcano is spewing out tuff and ash and all sorts of other bits, we have some igneous intrusions, rising magma cooling under the surface before it breaks the surface. This has led to another one of our quite prominent rock types. This on the right-hand side is markfieldite. This also known as the South Charnwood diorite. It's a granipheric microdiorite, which means that the crystals are kind of mingled together, which gives it this speckledy appearance. We know that from some of the structures in the rock that intruded into wet sediment. They're probably quite near, still under the surface, but quite near to the sediment water interface at the bottom of the sea. And of course, being a very hard rock, this has been quarried for a long time, many hundreds of years. I bet if we walked outside of this building, we would find a curbstone or a set of markfieldite within 2 minutes. They're everywhere, but not just in great cities like Leicester, also all around the country. I might talk about a bit more about that in a moment, but not just in our country. You might be good with eyesight. You might have noticed that that is not in English. Indeed, that is Luxembourgish and English and then French, because that specimen, so great is the story of Charnwood Forest that we sent a specimen off to the Wall of Geoparks in the Melodar Natur und Geopark, which is a UNESCO Global Geopark in Luxembourg. And that specimen was unveiled by the Minister of Tourism himself, for which we are most grateful and honoured. So there is an ambassador for Charnwood Forest geology in Luxembourg, should you ever find yourself there. And then, of course, at this point, all the geology was kind of horizontal. We had some Cambrian geology, which I'm skipping over for the process of today. Maybe ask Paul Smith about that. I know he's not talking on that subject, but he's another one of your speakers coming up in your roster, and he knows lots about the Cambrian of Charnwood Forest. Also ask him about all the times he's fallen off quarry faces while climbing while he was a student. Many fun stories. Caledonian orogeny, one of these major deformational events, building events in British geological history. That's the point in which we're having all our deformation. So it's obviously a phase of deformation, probably Ordovician to Silurian in age, but that's very vague. We need a student to come and do more work on that. You'll see that's a recurring thing. We want more students to come and do more research on Charnwood Forest. But that's when all of our geology is getting folded, and a very famous, fairly famous cleavage gets developed around then. Back in the day, it was the structural geology of Charnwood Forest. Before the fossils were found in the 50s, for 150 years prior to that, people have been coming to Charnwood Forest to study the structure of the rocks. They knew that these rocks were old, but actually they were coming to measure folds and measure cleavage and understand structure and deformation. That was the story of Charnwood Forest for 150 years before the fossils were found. And then in the Permian, around about 260 million years ago, Charnwood Forest lies at the center of Pangaea, the paleocontinent. By that time, after 250 million years, we've got to roughly around the equator. So it's very hot, but we have no Permian deposits in Charnwood Forest because for us, it was purely an erosive event. And it is a mighty important event. It was during the Permian that the landscape of Charnwood Forest was sculpted, mainly by wind-blown processes. And the impact of this is that when you stand on a hill in Charnwood Forest today, you are defying the general rule, which you may have been taught at university or school, that all topography is recent. It's not the case in Charnwood Forest. If you're standing on a hill in Charnwood Forest, you're standing on a hill that was a hill 250 million years ago. And it's merely got buried and then re-exposed again. And every valley you look at in Charnwood Forest was pretty much a valley back in Permian times. And one of the ways we know that it's wind-blown processes is if we look under the surface at the shape of our igneous bodies, so things like the markfieldite, and they've worked this out in some of the quarries in Charnwood Forest, as they've removed the subsequent latter deposits to see what the shape is of things like the markfieldite or the Mount Sorrel granodiorite, which is an Ordovician rock that I've glossed over for time. They have a very steep side, a rounded, domed top, and then very steep sides to them. These are sometimes referred to in geomorphology as born hearts. And these are very typical of areas where you've got a hard igneous rock and then you basically sandblast it for a lot of time. You often end up with a domed top and steep sides. That's one of the ways that we know that during the Permian, this was the main method of erosion and the sculpting of our landscape. So every rock that's pre-Permian was shaped into this landscape then. And then after that, many of the valleys that were created are filled in the Triassic, around about between 230 to 245 million years ago. We don't have a Permo-Triassic boundary section. Wouldn't it be a jolly lovely thing if we did? But again, you can't have everything. But those valleys were then filled in, and nowhere in Charnwood Forest is that more displayed in grand and huge splendour than if you go for a lovely walk up to the Barden Hill summit, 278 metres above sea level, the highest point in Charnwood Forest, the highest point in Leicestershire, and the highest point in the National Forest, the 25th highest county summit in the UK, and I'm going to alienate one member of the audience here because unfortunately the 24th highest county summit in the UK is 1 metre taller, and it's in Dorset. And so if anyone wants to join me for a kind of man who walked up a hill and came down a mountain, and we pile up some rocks on top of Barden Hill to take back 24th place from Dorset, then we will. But while you're up there, you will see this magnificent site. Of course, at the bottom here, we've got the sediments and volcanic rocks that Barden Hill has been quarried for. Ediacaran, around 260 to 270 million years old, in the kind of purple and brown, and then cutting across the middle of that in this kind of wonky V shape. So we've got a very steep side here on the left, and a very shallow side on the right. That is a giant cross-section through a valley that was carved in the Permian and filled in the Triassic. That is an unconformity that is hundreds of meters wide. You know, where better to teach the idea of unconformity than standing, it's not always that sunny, but why not stand on the summit of Barden Hill to teach unconformities? And we can see many of these small valleys are off to the side as well. Another one here. So we've got a Precambrian Triassic unconformity, most spectacularly and in a large fashion exposed in our big quarries. But you could get up close and personal with that unconformity as well if you go back to Morley Quarry in Shepshed, because you can see that unconformity right up close, and you can see even blocks of eroded Precambrian material in that Triassic sediment. And during this time, some researchers speculate that the Triassic deposits became so thick they actually covered the summits. Still debatable, but some researchers do suggest that. Most of those deposits, some of them are windblown, and some of them are water-laden in flash flood deposits. And this is why you'll often find that researchers referring to these structures not as valleys, but as wadis, using the terms that would be used in places like Oman, where you have, again, valley-type structures where it's dry most of the time, wind-blown processes, and then flash floods. You don't want to be at the bottom of that valley when it starts to rain. And that's what it would have been like in Charnwood Forest around 230 million years ago. And then today, skip over the Quaternary. Our last hard rock geological unit is, most recent, is the Triassic, but we do have some lovely Quaternary deposits. I can maybe go into those more in questions, or just come out and experience them in Charnwood Forest. So I want to now take some time to go over some of our hidden treasures. The fossils are great. I'm going to keep talking about the fossils all the time. We should be jolly proud that we've got such important paleontology right on our doorstep, but our job is to celebrate all of geology. And did you know there's actually quite a lot of earthquakes in Charnwood Forest? On the 4th of August, 1893, there was an earthquake that was centred on Woodhouse Eaves, and it was published in none other than Nature. So this publication, a few years later, was done in Nature. The author sent out letters to all the local newspapers asking people to send data in, and it was almost like early citizen science, drawing in all the feedback to try and work out where the epicenter was, and it was, of course, in Woodhouse. It's right in the centre. And we've got some great, one of my colleagues, Susan Kilby, who's our education officer at the Geopark, is a very passionate historian. She's been trawling the local newspaper archives and has found some of these great. So one from Woodhouse itself, the village of Woodhouse in Charnwood Forest, the inhabitants state that the vibration was perceptible for 5 seconds. The houses shook, and alarm prevailed, but no serious damage, which is really the story of all research into pretty much all English. When you look at newspaper records of English earthquakes, it is a tale of rattling ornaments, really. Except for my favourite one from Hinckley at the bottom. Miss Porter, engaged in dressmaking, saw the reels of cotton previously standing on her table dancing about, and a woman living up Mr. Porter's yard was so alarmed that she let her iron fall out of her hand. Oh, how do the people of Hinckley go on after that? And Barron saw there'd been an explosion in Loughborough. But then the train arrived and said, no, it's all fine. So we're going to be telling that story as well. And of course, there is the story of the impact of the earthquake from the 1950s, which damaged the dam at Blackbrook, the only British dam to have been damaged by 2 earthquakes. And many, many others, including quite recent ones. This is an important thing for the Geopark, telling our story, an often forgotten story. And if you or anyone at home joining us has a personal recollection from any of the earthquakes, we would love to hear about them. We want to combine the human, the living, the audio history with the geoscience as well. It's a great way to tell this story. You might not know that there are Carboniferous rocks in Charnwood Forest. If you go to lovely, I've zoomed in on the northwest section of our geological map here. You can see the beautiful town of Thringston there. Now, the coal measures, which you will find skirting along the western section of our geological map, here in the darker blue and the greys, they don't naturally crop out. So there's not really places we can take you to see the coal measures. But the limestone does. And it's in the light blue there, to the north of the large purple section. The purple section is the volcanic units that you find in Caedamon Woods and High Sharpley. So if you go to the ruins of the Priory at Gracedew, and then you walk south into the woods there, and you know the bit of vegetation that it's hidden under, you will find some a rather uncelebrated and long forgotten and a little bit lonely outcrop of the Carboniferous limestone, which we're going to be working on to tidy up and celebrate. But it's really important because it is the most southeasterly outcrop of the Carboniferous limestone in the Midlands area. And that tells us where the coastline was, because the unconformity between the Precambrian in purple and the Carboniferous in light blue is the shoreline. Because these are very shallow marine limestones. And so that's telling us where the paleo environments were and what the paleogeography was during the Carboniferous. And that is of such significance to our understanding of the history of Britain that this area of Charnwood Forest is protected as a triple SI, not because of the Precambrian, but because of the Carboniferous. So we have a site of special scientific interest defined purely because of its Carboniferous geology. I haven't found, please don't go fossil hunting there, it is protected. But we do need to go for a proper fossil hunt there. So if anyone wants to come and do a geoheritage audit with me at some point, there are fossil finds rumoured to have been found there, and we'd like to prove that they're still there. So if someone wants to come and find a Gigantoproductus with me or something like that, do come and join our Geoconservation Volunteers group. Castle Hill. Castle Hill, this is the original, not the current quarry, in Mount Sorrel. In the 80s and 90s, it was a landfill site, and now it's been capped over. But it is also a triple SI. It's a triple SI because it's representative of the Ordovician intrusion, the Mount Sorrel granodiorite, another igneous intrusive body. But rather strangely, it contains bitumen, or as it's listed in the triple SI declaration, asphaltite. So hydrocarbons inside an igneous intrusion. That's a bit weird. Don't normally find that. And this is one of many triple SIs that we have listed in Charnwood Forest, because we have something weird and we don't know how it got there. And it's a rather good thing for you to do in conservation. Often in biology, you know, you find some bird and you describe it and you find out everything about the bird, and then you protect the area where the bird lives. And you know everything and you protect it. In geology, we've been quite clever, we, the country, in that we protect this stuff we have no idea how it's there. And we still don't know how there's bitumen in an igneous intrusion in Charnwood Forest. So important, in fact, that once again in Nature, 1966, some people from NASA did some geochemistry of it. At the time, they said it was abiogenic. Some people disagree with them. Speculation went on through into the early and mid 1970s, and then no one's worked on it since. If anyone knows any geochemists that want to come and zap some of our asphaltite, it's still protected. We can get a permit to go and get some out and then find out how it got there, because it might be a very important story. Maybe it's actually biogenic and it's infiltrated in through the crack network. But the problem with that theory is, aren't the biogenic units after the Ordovician? And how do you make oil go downwards? Because shouldn't it float? So there's all sorts of problems, lots to be done. Isn't it a wonderful story? Come and help us figure it out. But that's Castle Hill, Mount Sorrel, and our weird bitumen in the middle of an igneous rock. We also have some quite famous visitors. Mr. Murchison himself, in the summer of 1826, came to visit Charnwood Forest to look at our geology. And the main thing his field notebook says about that trip is that he enjoyed an afternoon in the Bull's Head in Woodhouse Eaves. There are a few sketches of some of the outcrops at Beacon Hill, but I quite like the idea that he was mainly in the Bull's Head, because it is quite a nice pub. And we also have Sedgwick, who he wasn't there in 1933. Sorry, a typo. I've rather prolonged his impact on geology. 1833, and it was from Mount Sorrel that he wrote his famous phrase, "I am wedded to the rocks," which gets quoted a lot. You know, people write a biography about Sedgwick, and they call the biography or the book or the chapter title, "I am wedded to the rocks." But did you know that was written from Charnwood Forest? It's actually a bit of a longer story, because the reason he wrote that in a letter, he was writing to Mrs. Murchison. Mrs. Murchison had just written to him saying, Mr. Murchison and I are off on a geological field trip and we'd love for you to join us. And a lady's going to be joining us on the field trip as well. And Sedgwick, clearly noticing that he's basically being set up by geological field trip and doesn't want anything to do with it. He wants to see the rocks, but he doesn't want to be set up. Writes back this phrase, "I am wedded to the rocks," as a kind of, I don't need ladies, I've got the rocks. But the longer quote, which no one ever quotes, is, well, put it this way, you wouldn't get away with it today. It's a bit, "I am wedded to the rocks, and Mount Sorrel," don't tell the people of Mount Sorrel, "does not the words set your teeth on edge, is my present mistress. By the way, she is a little coy and hard-hearted and refuses to tell me her pedigree and to introduce me to her old relations. But I am going with Professor Well and Airy to knock at one of her back doors tomorrow morning, and perhaps we may make an entry and establish ourselves in one of her larders. Should that be the case, we shall dish her up to some tune. But talking of love has made me run into figurative language, which you know is quite out of place in geology. So leaving all figures, let me again tell you how much I thank you and how miserable I am that I cannot join your party, and how delighted I shall be to meet you all again in London. Yours, my dear Mrs. Murchison, to the bottom of Lyell's Hypogene rocks, which isn't that just the most wonderful way to finish a letter? Add that to your emails from now on. Yours to the bottom of Lyell's Hypogene rocks. So yes, she tried to set him up, but he wasn't having any of it because he's wedded to the rocks. I guess so. Maybe we'll quote the whole thing. Just some of the other things. The story of Charnwood Forest, as I've said, is not limited to Charnwood Forest. We have exported our geology to all sorts of interesting places. We can find the use of our stones locally if we look at the use of the Bradgate Formation in some of the buildings in Woodhouse Eaves. I've already talked about Markfieldite and the Mount Sorrel granodiorite, both quarried to be used as sets or curbstones originally, and can be found Leicester, Nottingham, Oxford, London. I say the streets of London are paved with Leicestershire, and it's true. Go to, where was that one? Googe Place, just next to Euston Station, but you can find it in many of the Victorian streets. They're all paved with mostly Markfieldite and Mount Sorrel, all mixed together as well, even though they came from two separate quarries, one's Precambrian, one's Ordovician. But they all get mixed together in the builders' yards of Victorian London. You can even find them in the curbstones for our Buckingham Palace as well. Marble Arch, bus stop R, is worth a visit. The curbstone next to bus stop R, I think it is, Marble Arch has a giant feldspar, this big, in one of the Mount Sorrel curbstones. If you're a mineralogy buff, go and check out the giant feldspar in that curbstone. Swidland slate from the Cambrian, a wonderfully bioturbated mudstone, carved in the most beautiful way. So we have and preserves a lot better than many of the other stones that were used. Mainly used in Leicestershire, with beautiful, beautiful detail. We can read some of them 300-400 years later in a way that if you, we find that a lot of the gravestones in the churchyards, if you were super rich, you didn't get Swidland slate, that was local. You went and, had a lovely bit of Purbeck or something. And of course it crumbles, and we can't read their gravestones, but the good local rock is still telling the names and stories of those people hundreds of years later. So we love the Swidland slate. And you can even find Swidland slate in London. This is the Albert Memorial just next to Hyde Park. And if you go there and you notice the triangles of green and purple and grey slate there, that's Swidland slate Cambrian from Charnwood Forest. And the rocks at Charnwood Forest, we have evidence for over 2,000 years of use. There are stones in the foundations of Roman buildings in this city that have rocks from Charnwood Forest in their structures. And that continues today. Barden Hill and Mount Sorrel vie for the position of largest quarry in Western Europe. Each one individually produces somewhere between 8 and 12% of the UK's entire aggregate needs. The bottom of Mount Sorrel quarry is deeper than sea level by quite some way. These are huge structures and of huge economic significance, not only to the region, but also to the country. So that's another thing the Geopark will be talking about. Oh, and there we go. Some of the things that have been built in more recent times with stone. I think this is just from Barden Hill. Silverstone, the new Wembley Stadium, the new Olympic Park, the Shard. And when we look more broadly to the other quarries in Charnwood Forest, Buckingham Palace, the M25, the M1, 50% of the ballast currently being used in the entire British National Rail system comes from Charnwood Forest. Our rocks are basically the country would keel over if it wasn't for Charnwood Forest. So what are we doing about it now? There endeth the geology. I'm going to talk to you a bit more about just a bit what the geopark is and what it's doing. So the geopark comes out of the idea of the Charnwood Forest Regional Park. A regional park is a non-statutory definition. It doesn't mean anything in law. It's just some people got together and decided that it is a thing. That's all it is, but a jolly useful decision it is. And all of these organisations and others came together and recognised that Charnwood Forest sat at the crossroads between different bits of government, different local authorities, all in Leicestershire, but some in Charnwood, some in Hinkley and Bosworth, some in North West Leicestershire. It had missed out on national park. It had missed out on outstanding natural beauty, now known as a national landscape. And so they knew they had to work together if they were going to protect this very important area. So about 15 years ago, they set up the idea of the Charnwood Forest Regional Park, and that was to look at a number of different ways, including joining up the planning process a bit more across those local authorities and other projects to promote the area. And they realised they needed a kind of big project. So they pushed to get some funding from the National Lottery, the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and that is what I am funded by now. So myself and my 4 colleagues, we all work together on a National Lottery Heritage Fund project called the Landscape Partnership Scheme, and I'm semi-contractually obliged to thank all lottery fee payers because basically you pay for my job. So thank you. And working together, we're implementing a number of projects that help conserve, protect, and celebrate Charnwood Forest in the boundary that I showed to you earlier on. And one of our very early aims is to seek formal recognition for the area as a UNESCO Global Geopark. So what are the projects we're working on and how do we become a geopark? So one of the things, obviously, geoconservation. Geology is our international significance, where we've got lots of very important other bits, often connected to the geology. Our cultural heritage is often defined by the local geology, and our biodiversity is reliant on it. It all comes back to the rocks in the end. But one of the things we've been supporting is geoconservation. So we've been working to increase the protection. You will be hearing some fairly significant announcements in the next few months about new geoconservation designations. So we're getting new and enhanced protection legally for some of these sites. That's a sneaky, don't go tweeting that straight away. That's a sneaky behind the scenes release. And also working on some of the sites as well. So some of the sites have had graffiti on them. So we're working with experts from cultural heritage. You know, they know what to do when there's graffiti on the same bit of rock when it's in a building. So it's pretty simple. Let's bring those, let's learn from our colleagues in cultural heritage and apply those conservation techniques to our rocks when they haven't been quarried yet. Seems sensible, but a lot of people haven't done it before in different areas. So that's one of the things we've been doing. We've also, as I previously mentioned, set up our wonderful group of geoconservation volunteers, and they come out and help us at the moment once a month. And we go out, and there's Morley Quarry, the gently inclined Precambrian rocks of Morley Quarry there, and our intrepid group of frost-covered people. There, a lot of work in some of these old quarries is about removing vegetation that is covering these outcrops. We're also telling the story, new interpretation, guided walks, training up other people to give guided tours. We've got to sell this story. Big part of our thinking and our philosophy is you can't protect what you don't understand. So it's our job within the Geopark team to make sure to sell that story, to tell the story. If people understand that this stuff is really important, they're more likely to look after it. And also celebrating Charnwood Forest in different ways. Not everyone has the foresight and passion like you people to come to a talk about geology. Some people aren't inspired by geology in its purest form. I feel sorry for those people, but it is a fact of life. So we're going to have to lure people into geology through different routes. And there's many ways we should be doing that. We should reach out to people via the mechanism which gets them going, which inspires them. And so one way is art. this is actually a region that has inspired artists for hundreds of years. We never talk about it. Leicester has a long and proud history of a big art scene, a centre for art. Is Ravenhill, which is in Bradgate Park. Edward Davies. Landscape is part, whether you can see a rock or not, is part of geodiversity. It's geomorphology, and it's inspiring these artists. We have Laborare Estorare, a very famous painting in the Tate by John Roger Herbert. This is of Charnwood Lodge and Mount St Bernard's Abbey, taking a few liberties with the painting there, because you'll notice there's a spire, and there's no spire on the abbey there. He's actually painting the abbey in its original designs as designed by Pugin, but those original designs weren't actually built. But yeah, another connection. If maybe you don't care about geology, but you care about architecture, well, come and look at all the wonderful buildings that were built in Charnwood Forest by none other than Pugin, famous for the Houses of Parliament, and Railton, famous for Nelson's Column. Oh, and what were they building out of? Local stone, because they were big supporters of vernacular architecture. Oh, we've just taught some people about geology when they weren't expecting it. Geopark job done. So there's another scene. We've even got John Fernley, widely regarded as one of the greatest British painters of horses of all time, at the Yale Centre for British Art there. Archery meeting in Bradgate Park, and you can see Old John Tower at the back there. We should recreate that one day. And then this chap, you probably never heard of him, John Constable, also in the Yale Centre for British Art, painted Barden Hill around about 1823. If we can't lure people who are interested in art in with Constable, I don't know what we should do, but there we go. So this is one of the other ways of drawing people into our geological story. And then making sure that all the different aspects, this is just my kind of logo of connection, making sure that when people come in, they don't just go to our 3 famous sites, which are Bradgate Park, Beacon Hill, and the Outwoods. The vast majority of visitation to Charnwood Forest is to those 3 sites. They are beautiful sites. We work closely with the landowners at all 3 of them. They have miraculous stories to tell, and we are very much going to tell them. But we want the visitors to those places to be left wanting more, to be inspired. Okay, I've seen the rocks at Bradgate Park, but I want to know the next chapter of the story of Charnwood Forest, and therefore I need to go to Markfield Knoll, or therefore I need to go and see Forest Rock in Woodhouse Eaves, or therefore I need to go and see chapter 1 of the story with the oldest rocks in Charnwood Forest, and some of the oldest rocks in England in Morley Quarry. Food. Did you know Charnwood Forest has a vineyard in it? One of only 2 vineyards in Leicestershire, and it makes jolly nice wine. My family's Christmas table was adorned with wine from Charnwood Forest this year. Soon to launch as one of our geoproduct partners. So this is food and drink that connects itself to its local geology. The reason that area is fairly decent for growing vines on is because the quaternary pebble beds underneath, which are good for the drainage. There's a story to be told, and every product that's going to go out of the vineyard and places like Temple Bees Honey is going to be telling that little bit of geology story for us. We've also been investing in footpaths. So you can now walk from Loughborough to Leicestershire through Charnwood Forest without having to step on the road, thanks to a new footpath between Outwards and Beacon Hill. So we're investing in access to the countryside as well. There's a new website at charnwoodforest.org. Please do go and see it for more information. Natural flood management on places like the Wood Brook, a very hot topic at the moment after recent events. Making sure that we're supporting biodiversity, but also protecting some of the communities further downstream on places like the Wood Brook. We've been investing in that. Our education programme, all schools in Charnwood Forest can have free resources from us. We'll even stretch out to places outside of Charnwood Forest as well, with my friend Susan Kilby, who goes out and supports all of that free field trips, all sorts of good stuff. But what is a geopark? Why are we doing all of this? As I wrap up, I've rambled on for too long. A geopark is an area with internationally significant geology that uses that geology for the purpose of sustainable economic development and to promote education. So it's different to a World Heritage Site because you have to mix it with using your geology to inspire the next generation to get out into schools, to have interpretation out there, and also for sustainable economic development. So that's about local businesses not ripping up the geology and selling it, but maybe they give a tour. Maybe they have a Charnwood biscuit that you're inspired to pay £1 extra for to go along your cappuccino that you've had after a walk around Bradgate Park. It's things like that, because the fact is, once you've had a walk around Bradgate Park, you will spend £1 more on a little Charnwood biscuit that looks like a Randu moth from 560 million years ago. We know this from our friends at other geoparks around the world, and some of the places you might not have known that they're a UNESCO Global Geopark. Hong Kong, the Ngorongoro Lengai, famous for the Ngorongoro crater in Tanzania. Lanzarote, the Northwest Highlands in Scotland, Burren and the Cliffs of Moher. For the wine drinkers, Beaujolais. Kutracura in Chile in South America. Waitaki, Whitestone in New Zealand, the first UNESCO Global Geopark in New Zealand. And very famous recently, Reykjanes, where all the volcanic eruptions have been happening in Iceland. That is a UNESCO Global Geopark. There's 195 in 48 different countries, and we'd very much like to join that very auspicious club, that very important club. We'd like to join that in the next few years, hopefully. We'll need lots of support from communities, people getting involved, and maybe the Lithium Phil might like to join in that. Come and have a field trip, come and look around, come and support us, come and volunteer. So this is the plan at the moment. It's not all in our control, but we hope that we'll be able to submit our application at the end of next year. It would then be evaluated in 2026 with desktop exercises by experts around the world and a visit by 2 experts some point in the summer of 26. And if all goes well and they submit a report that says, yes, they're doing what they need to do, then hopefully at the UNESCO Executive Board meeting in April or May of 2027, they will announce that Charnwood Forest is one of the world's newest UNESCO Global Geoparks, and we can have a jolly good party with some sparkling wine from Rothley Wine Estate. So that's the plan. That's what we're working on. There's still a lot to be done. I know I glossed across a lot of very important geology that I just didn't have time to talk about. There's so many stories to tell. And you can see in the way that the geopark's working, there's a lot of different ways to tell it as well. Over the next year, you're going to see a big change in Charnwood Forest, new interpretation. That's our big push for the start of this year. So there's going to be new panels going up. Not everything is going to be a panel though. New ways, you've got the new website. But we'd love to hear your thoughts and have your support as well. We can't do this by ourselves. And thank you so much for having me. And if you've got any questions and I've left enough time, I look to our auspicious leaders. I'd be happy to take them. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jack. Fascinating stuff there. Some stories that we've perhaps heard once or twice, but many stories that we've never heard, I'm sure, many of us, and great background, and that sort of that way ahead is tantalizingly close, but still a few years in the future.
Yeah. I'm just going to make sure see how we, after I killed the, while you're talking, I'm going to try and get the instructions back on the Zoom, just in case someone has asked a question, but you carry on. Apologies.
While we get the Zoom back, is there any questions from within the lecture theatre for Jack?
You're all sold on the fact that Charnwood Forest is an astonishing and amazing place.
Oh, okay, I have a question.
Don't fire away.
So, partly prompted by the Beaujolais.
Yes.
Geopark. So, do you know what the varieties of grape they are growing in Charnwood Forest? Are they similar to Beaujolais?
No, most of them are German varieties.
Oh, okay.
You'll find that most vines in outside of the southeast are German varieties. I can't remember them all. I know one of them is called Solaris. One of the white wines is Solaris, which is in one of the wines that I particularly like. But to find out more, you have to go on the tour. Yes, because Liz at Rothley Wine does a wonderful tour where she talks about the different vines as if they are a family. So, you know, there's the dependable grandmother vine, always there, always turn up. You can always rely on good wine every year. Then there's the vine that's like the spotty teenager, and, you know, sometimes just doesn't turn up. You get no grapes that year and you get nothing. And then some year just surprises you. Wonderful wine. Right. And she tells, she's a wonderful storyteller. Good, that sold it. I'm definitely going to Rothley Vineyard at some point. Apologies to our friends joining us online. I have hidden the controls and I can't bring them back. Oh, do we? See, it was up there, but now it's not. Ah, there we go. Haha. Yes. Right, we have the chat. Good evening. Good evening. Thank you, Brian. Oh, you couldn't hear me when I moved away. Apologies, Anthony.
Hello.
Does anyone at home have a question?
I have.
Fire away.
Given the importance of the fossils in Charnwood Forest, many of which are type specimens, many are figured specimens, many are of equal importance, do you think they are being adequately cared for, given the requirements for looking after type and figured specimens?
I do.
By leaving them.
So for just in case people couldn't hear, bearing in mind that many of the fossils in Charnwood Forest are type specimens and figured specimens, are they being adequately cared for? So the first thing to recognise is that I'm hugely biased in that, because my job title is Charnwood Forest Geoheritage Conservation and Interpretation Officer. So if I say no, I'm basically admitting to not doing my job. And I think it's worth recognising that. But I do think they are adequately cared for. One of the best things we can do for our fossil sites in Charnwood Forest is keep their locations a secret. And I do not apologise for the fact that we do not publish the locations of fossil sites. And when people do publish them, we track down the authors of those articles, those websites, those social media posts, and we request that they take them down, because these sites are just too important. And we know that there is a global black market in these fossils. And the example I will always quote is we have a fossil in Charnwood Forest that used to be classified as a different species of Charnia. It's now been synonymized with Charnia masoni, but we still regard it as the kind of the grandis morphotype. It used to be called Charnia grandis. It's kind of gigantic version of Charnia, but now it's just seen as a big Charnia. But this morphotype of Charnia, this big version of it, there are only two known in the world, or rather, there were only two known in the world. The one that was known from Newfoundland was destroyed in a failed attempt to steal it. So we have the only remaining giant specimen of Charnia in the world. And again, the reason that fossil was able to be stolen in Newfoundland is because in 2008, an author published a very detailed map with locality dots all over the map. So if you have access to that publication, you can track down the location of thousands of Ediacaran fossils, and it has put them at risk, and we will not do that in Charnwood Forest. And we will, sometimes it looks like we are being grumpy. Don't you publish that? You can't find out about that. But it is the best thing we can do for our fossils. That's not the only thing that we do. We monitor all of the sites. We support casting work. We support the work that's being done when there's been graffiti or scratching on surfaces to repair and hide that. We will be making, I can't talk about it in great detail at the moment, but we were making a sizable investment at one of our fossil sites this year to basically remove it from public access. Because the public don't need to go to our fossil sites. They will always be there for science, but the fact is, you can hardly see these fossils. If we were to take everyone, if we were to take the public there, they would be thoroughly underwhelmed because the preservation is so flat, unlike our dear friends in Canada, where yes, there is a time of day when the light is most beautiful and low angle and they look beautiful, but you can go there you can go to Mistaken Point on a rainy day and still be wowed. The fact is, at some of our fossil sites, we've now measured it, there's a 15-minute window of when the sunlight is at the right angle, and if you look, and if there's a cloud in the way, you get no good light that day. So there's no reason for people to be going to look at our fossils, because they're going to be underwhelmed and think, what has Jack been talking about? He says they're amazing and I can't see anything on the rock. But there's two sides to that coin, and we still must tell our story and we must make it accessible. So we will install new, high quality, publicly accessible outdoor casts of fossils. So people can still have a fossil experience outdoors on the windy hills of Charnwood Forest and still have that. Well, I want children to be touching these things without us having to worry that, you know, is it going to get scratched or anything? I can always replace a cast. We cannot replace the original. And this is one of the hard things in conservation that we have to get our, particularly our colleagues in broader conservation, which is often dominated by people in ecology and biology. If we make the wrong decision about a forest, we can replant the forest. If we realize we've done something wrong, we can plant the trees again. If we do something wrong with these fossils, there's no regrowing a Charnia. It's gone. So we have to look after them in a different way. So we'll be doing that. And the other thing is, we need a visitor centre. As we need a place where we can properly celebrate the story of Charnwood Forest, and that needs a dedicated geological visitor centre. Our dear friends at the BGS have casts that were taken, funded by Natural England more than 10 years ago, of some of our most important fossil sites, which could easily fill the walls of this lecture theatre. But at the moment, they cannot be adequately displayed because there simply is not a space big enough that can be lit in the right way. So maybe if you would help me fundraise to find that building, and we have a few irons in the fire, but it's going to take a lot of work. We could create a nationally significant geological museum that properly celebrates the geology of Charnwood Forest, where everyone can come and see in amazing splendor the giant surface, bedding surface scale, hundreds and hundreds of fossils, beautifully lit. And you really do get a wow moment when you see them. It's a totally different ball game when you show the whole fossil surface to when you show an individual specimen of a Charnia or a Bradgatia or what have you. So there's a lot to be done. I do think we are doing a good job, but there's a lot more that we can do. And I know it's a very long answer, but the final thing is, in my view, local people are the best custodians of their geology. There is a prevailing view in academia that scientists have got to lead the whole thing, and it's totally wrong. Local people are the best custodians of their geoheritage, and we need to empower them and enable them to do that, because the dirty little secret from academia is that scientists are one of the biggest threats to geoheritage. And the sooner we get my colleagues to realise that they need to be ethical researchers, the better. But we will be working closely with our local communities as well to empower them to look after their geology. Because they know when something's gone wrong. They know when there's a car hanging around down the end of the road and, oh, sounds a bit like a disc cutter. That's what we need.
Thank you for that very comprehensive answer, and I hope that's answered your question, Roy.
Not really, but he's another day.
Well,
I think
of course,
it's about face.
sorry?
It's an ask about face approach, in my opinion, but there you go.
Happy to discuss it further. You're more than welcome to contact me at jack.matthews@nationalforest.org.
Okay, thank you. We are really getting along for time. Is there one more question online at all, or in the auditorium? No. In which case, I'd like to thank you all for attending, either online or in person. And again, once again, I'd like to thank Jack. So if you could join me both with your physical hands or your virtual hands online, and we can thank you in the normal way. Thank you. Sorry?
Next meeting, where is it?
Yeah, next meeting will be in here. We will send around details of the talk. We're just finalising that.